everyone, today news we will talk about Iran, Israel, and the American ultimatum. The United States. The supreme leader of Iran has declared a stance of no compromise with Israel, even as President Trump calls for Iran's unconditional surrender and considers direct military intervention, including targeting Iranian nuclear sites. The conflict has seen missile strikes from Iran on Israeli cities, while Israel has conducted strikes within Iran, notably targeting residential areas and universities. Experts weigh in on the disparity in military capabilities and the potential implications for international peace if the United States fully enters the conflict.
The Middle East is, well, it's caught in a conflict that's escalating with a speed and intensity that really feels different this time. What felt like simmering tension just days ago has exploded into outright war.
Yeah, it's incredibly fast.
We're seeing this unprecedented confrontation now between Iran and Israel. And then you have the U.S. weighing in with these really dramatic, sometimes frankly surprising statements and actions.
And that's exactly what we need to unpack for you today. In this deep dive, we're going to try and thoroughly examine the core statements, the actual actions on the ground, and, the underlying tensions. We're drawing this straight from the sources you've shared.
Right.
This isn't just about skimming the headlines or the daily news cycle. It's really about connecting those critical pieces of information, helping you get a better handle on what's genuinely happening, and maybe just as importantly, what the key players say they want.
Okay, let's dig in then. We're now, day 6 of this conflict that people are calling an unprecedented war. Just think for a second about the immediate impact of that.
It's significant.
Overnight, we saw major strikes from Iran hitting Tel Aviv. Sources are telling us it was around 30 missiles fired from Iran to Israel.
Yeah, in a really short window, too.
Just 20 minutes. Can you even imagine that kind of barrage? Tel Aviv was, nearly brought to a halt by it all. And we know an automotive factory got hit somewhere in the area.
And a really critical detail here, I think, is that Israel hasn't actually announced exactly what's been hit on their side, which, it just adds another layer of difficulty when you're trying to piece together the full picture. There are these information challenges.
Absolutely. And then you have the counterstrikes. Israel's striking inside Iran. And some of the details emerging there are quite specific, kind of alarming, actually.
What are we hearing there?
Well, the Israeli army apparently issued an evacuation order at 2:30 a.m. Tehran time for a specific area, quarter number 18.
And that's a residential area.
Exactly, a residential area. And then just half an hour later, 3 a.m., Israeli planes reportedly hit that exact quarter.
Wow. And there were other targets, too.
Yes, the reports also mention Israeli aircraft hitting the Imam Hussein University.
Okay, and that's significant because...
Well, according to the sources, that university includes a nuclear physics faculty and also an aviation engineering faculty.
Right, so that immediately raises questions about, the strategic thinking behind those targets. The implications.
Absolutely. So with all this happening on the ground, this kinetic activity, what are the leaders actually saying? How are they framing it?
Well, let's start with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. He's been very defiant.
Yeah, I saw the posts. Things like, Iran will never compromise with Zionists.
Right, and also saying, we will show the Zionists no mercy. Very strong language.
And then that simple, almost chilling declaration, the battle begins.
If you connect that to the bigger picture, Khamenei's rhetoric certainly signals a strong intent to escalate from Iran's side.
And how realistic is that, given the capabilities?
Well, that's the crucial context, isn't it? You have to remember the significant military disparity, just in terms of raw power and technology between Iran and Israel. And that's even before you factor in the possibility of the U.S. getting fully involved.
So does that suggest the rhetoric might be more for, say, an internal audience? Or maybe a kind of calculated bluff?
That's a really good question. It's often a mix, isn't it? Internally, that kind of defiance shores up support, reinforces national resolve. Externally, well, it could be deterrence. It could be trying to set a high bar for any negotiation. You have to ask, is this genuine military intent, or is it a strategic message?
Right. Okay, so beyond the immediate fighting and Khamenei's defiance, there's this whole other drama playing out on the world stage.
Yes, a diplomatic angle.
And this is where President Trump makes a very dramatic entrance into the discussion. He suddenly rushes back to Washington, leaves the G7 summit a day early.
Right, the Group of Seven meeting.
And French President Macron apparently suggested, maybe a bit wishfully, that Trump left to negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Iran.
But Trump shut that down pretty quickly.
Immediately. His response was just, that's not it. And then he clarified, didn't he? Something like, we're not looking for a ceasefire.
Yeah, he said, I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often.
Right. And then he added, but we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
So what's better than a ceasefire?
An end. He said, what specifically is better than a ceasefire?
Yes.
What are you looking for here? An end. A real end, not a ceasefire, an end.
A real end. That's quite a statement.
And his social media was just as direct. Posts calling for unconditional surrender.
Unconditional surrender. Wow.
And even saying things like, we know where the so-called supreme leader is hiding, but we are not going to take him out, at least not for now. But adding the warning, but we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers.
It's probably striking, isn't it? A complete shift almost in Trump's approach here.
Yeah.
It feels like quite a turn for a president who, campaigned on promising no new war on his watch. And the sources we looked at really highlight this key question. How much of this is him genuinely gearing up for a fight? And how much is it? Well, the art of the deal.
His negotiating tactic.
Exactly. He often uses that kind of extreme rhetoric, doesn't he? Not necessarily meaning he'll act on it immediately, but maybe as a way to stake out a really strong opening position.
But isn't that incredibly risky, playing art of the deal in a situation this volatile? Couldn't that kind of maximalist stance, or even just the perception of a bluff, lead to some really dangerous miscalculations?
Absolutely. That is the danger. Yeah. The risk is always that the other side takes the rhetoric at face value, sees it as a genuine imminent threat, and instead of coming to the table, they might escalate their own actions in response. Miscalculation in a conflict zone like this. It's a constant serious threat.
Okay, so with these really strong statements flying around and the fighting escalating, the big question becomes, what about direct U.S. involvement?
Right. Where does the U.S. actually stand in terms of action?
We know Americans have been helping Israel shoot down Iranian missiles. That's been reported. But they seemed initially resistant to joining the attacks directly.
But that might be changing.
Well, our sources detail this emergency White House meeting. And reportedly, President Trump discussed striking Iranian nuclear sites, specifically the deeply buried ones, like that facility at Fordo.
Which Israeli bombs apparently can't reach on their own.
Exactly. And on top of that discussion, the U.S. has been actively moving assets, moving fighter jets to the Middle East, and also repositioning dozens of tanker aircraft, the ones used for refueling fighters and bombers, moving them to Europe.
Which signals significant logistical preparation.
Yeah.
You don't move tankers like that lightly.
No.
And this connects directly back to Israel's stated reason for this whole war, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which they say is preempting Iran from developing nuclear weapons in the future.
Right. That's their justification.
But, and this is a big but, that justification seems to fly in the face of many reports from international agencies. You mentioned the IAEA earlier, the UN's nuclear watchdog.
Yeah.
And actually, even U.S. intelligence agencies themselves have reportedly been saying that while Iran has been enriching uranium to, significant levels, they weren't actually getting close to developing weapons of mass destruction, not nuclear weapons anyway.
So you have this major disconnect, international agencies, even U.S. intel saying one thing about the nuclear program, and Israel stating another as its reason for war. How does that discrepancy affect how the world sees this, the trust factor?
Well, it creates a huge diplomatic challenge, obviously.
Right.
And it definitely fosters a trust deficit. The insight here, maybe, is that justifications for war are often complex, layered, and figuring out the real drivers means you have to look beyond just the stated reasons. You need to look at the intelligence, the context, and critically ask, who benefits from which narrative being believed.
And it's even harder to assess when information is restricted.
Exactly. We have to remember there are civil restrictions on freedom of information, on reporting in both Iran and Israel. So there are many things happening, especially the human impact, the true scope that we really just do not know from the outside.
So here we are. It's barely been a week, and we've gone from these background tensions to, well, a full-blown war. We've seen defiance from Tehran, these demands for unconditional surrender from Washington, and direct military hits on critical sites, even a university with sensitive faculties. The sheer speed and intensity, it's kind of breathtaking.
It really is. And maybe this leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on.
Yeah.
Given those conflicting reports about Iran's nuclear program, the official justification versus the intelligence assessments, how do we, as people trying to stay informed, critically evaluate the reasons given for going to war?
Yeah, how do you weigh that conflicting information?
And what does it actually mean to achieve Trump's stated goal? A real end to a conflict this deep-seated, this complex. What does that look like beyond just stopping the shooting, beyond a mere ceasefire? That's a deep dive that, frankly, continues long after we stop talking today.